The darkness was absolute. Not even the sonar's light could penetrate the depths where it rested. For decades, the Nautilus 13 remained missing, swallowed by the ocean without a trace. Launched in 1987 on a top-secret military mission, the submarine and its 20 crew members simply disappeared, with no distress signals, no wreckage, no explanation. The case became a mystery surrounded by theories. Catastrophic failure? Secret experiments? An unknown force in the depths? Nothing was ever proven. Now, more than 30 years later, the anomaly appeared on the radar of an underwater exploration team. A metallic signal, 3,800 meters deep, exactly where nothing should have been. Initially, they thought it was just wreckage from some shipwreck. But when the drones captured the first images, the truth was revealed. There, almost intact, lay the Nautilus 13, as if time had never passed. The discovery was met with skepticism. How could a submarine lost for so long be in such good condition? Even in high-pressure environments, deterioration was inevitable. But the hull was intact, with no signs of structural collapse. And most disturbing of all, there were no bodies, no skeletons, no abandoned diving suits, nothing to indicate what happened to the crew. It was as if everyone had simply evaporated. The mystery deepened when one of the drones found the communications room. Among old equipment covered in mud and rust, a sealed metal capsule rested on the central table. Unlike the rest of the submarine, it seemed untouched, as if someone had placed it there recently. Faced with the discovery, the researchers were in a dilemma. The capsule could contain mission records, perhaps the key to understanding what happened. But something about its presence caused discomfort. Its exterior was marked with scratches that seemed made from the inside. Despite the uneasy feeling, the team brought the capsule to the surface. Inside it, protected by sealed plastic, was a diary. A simple notebook with a black cover, where the name David Keller was scrawled. Keller was the submarine's communications officer. Flipping through the first pages, the notes seemed normal. Technical records, day-to-day observations. But as the pages progressed, the accounts grew strange. Something is out there, knocking on the hull, always at the same frequency. The team exchanged nervous glances. The knocks echoed in everyone's mind, as if, even now, they could still hear them. And then, the last note. Quick, trembling, written in a rush. If you find this, run. Do not open the submarine. Silence filled the room. No one dared to speak. Because, at that moment, everyone felt the same thing. It was too late. The capsule rested on the metal table of the makeshift lab, aboard the research vessel Orpheus 9. Keller's diary had already been opened, its words resonating like a belated warning. But the submarine still lay down below, inert, waiting to reveal its secrets. The scientific team, led by Dr. Henry Lawson, was still trying to process what they had found. The Nautilus 13 had disappeared over 3 decades ago, but its interior seemed to have been sealed just yesterday. How was this possible? We need to get inside, Lawson said, breaking the silence. If there's anything in there, we need to document it. The underwater drone operators confirmed that access to the submarine was possible. The hatches were sealed, but minimal corrosion would allow the remotely operated vehicles to enter. With a command, the main hatch was unlocked. The metal creaked, emitting an agonizing sound that echoed through the audio transmissions. The door slowly opened, revealing a dark corridor. The drones advanced. LED lights swept the interior. The floor and walls were intact, except for a thin layer of moisture and silt accumulated over the years. The crew had vanished, but their marks remained. Coffee mugs were still on the tables, documents scattered on the floor, as if the submarine had been abandoned in haste. The first discovery came in the dormitory room. One of the bunks was overturned, the sheets tangled, as if someone had struggled there. Scratch marks covered the metallic surface of the wall beside the bed. Long, deep ones. Was this made by human hands? Asked one of the researchers, watching the screen with unease. No one answered. The exploration continued to the control room. All the panels were off, the gauges frozen at the exact moment the submarine stopped functioning. But something didn't make sense. Even without power, the digital clocks were still ticking. The display blinked. 3:17 a.m. This can't be possible, Lawson murmured. The power shouldn't have lasted this long. It was then that the radio static crackled. A low noise, almost imperceptible. They all looked at each other. Did that come from the submarine? Someone asked. The drone operator adjusted the frequencies, trying to pick up the signal. And then, a voice emerged, faint and distorted, as if it were being transmitted from very far away. You never should have opened it. Please, if there's still time. The audio fragmented into a sharp crackle, followed by absolute silence. The team aboard the Orpheus 9 stood frozen. Lawson's heart was pounding. That transmission. His voice faltered. Did it come from inside the Nautilus 13? The operators confirmed. Yes, the transmission came from the submarine. But that was impossible. The Nautilus 13 had been submerged for over 30 years. The oppressive atmosphere aboard the Orpheus 9 was suffocating. The team had gathered around the central console, their eyes glued to the various screens that displayed data from the underwater drones. It was as if the shadows of the Nautilus 13 had seeped into the ship, making everyone uneasy. Dr. Lawson's pulse quickened as he scanned the footage of the shadow moving through the submarine. It wasn't a trick of the light, nor a malfunction of the drone's camera. There was someone, on board the Nautilus 13. We need to go down there, Lawson said abruptly, his voice harsh with urgency. No. The room erupted in hushed whispers. The crew wasn't ready. The footage, the voice, the strange markings inside the submarine. All of it pointed to something far beyond their understanding. They had no answers. But they could no longer ignore what they had found. A soft hum resonated through the ship as the descent procedures began. The Orpheus 9 released a smaller submersible, capable of docking with the Nautilus 13 at the depths where it lay trapped. Lawson, along with a few of the most experienced members of his team, would be going down. Everyone else would stay behind to monitor the situation from above. The submersible descended slowly into the dark abyss of the ocean. The deeper they went, the darker the waters became, swallowing any sense of safety and clarity. The hum of the engines reverberated through the small vessel, as the team members tried to shake off the unease gnawing at their nerves. Outside, the lights from the submersible barely illuminated the wreckage around them. The Nautilus 13 loomed, its silhouette just visible in the distance. We're approaching. The pilot of the submersible's voice broke the tense silence. The docking procedure was slow and careful. As the vessel locked into place with the Nautilus 13, the submersible's lights flickered. The vast expanse of the submarine's hull stretched out before them, covered in algae, corrosion, and barnacles. It was as though time had stood still, frozen in this underwater crypt. Lawson's heart pounded in his chest as the airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped onto the cold metal deck of the Nautilus 13. The interior was just as they had seen in the drone footage, eerie, abandoned, yet oddly preserved. The strange atmosphere seemed to hang in the air, thick with an unspoken tension. Stay close, Lawson ordered. Move quickly. We don't know what we're dealing with here. The crew entered the dark corridors of the submarine, their flashlights cutting through the pitch-black void. The soft hum of the submersible's lights was the only sound besides their footsteps. Every turn, every corridor, every room seemed frozen in time, like a macabre museum. They passed the overturned bunks, the abandoned mess hall, the scattered papers that hadn't decayed or been touched by time. Then, they entered the command center. The control panels were still active, but the screens were cracked, and the air inside felt thicker, more oppressive. Check the logs, Lawson said, his voice shaking with a mixture of excitement and dread. He needed answers, desperately. One of the technicians went to work immediately, pulling up the digital logs on the nearest terminal. As the screen flickered to life, something caught his eye. A list of entries, each one more cryptic than the last. Day 5, we heard it again. The banging on the hull. It's relentless. Day 6, more shadows. I can hear them outside the hull. Day 7, it's inside. Something is inside. Day 8, I can't sleep. The walls are moving. The entries were more frantic as the days went on. The last entry was dated just a few hours before the Nautilus 13 was believed to have sunk. Day 15, The knocking is getting louder. It's coming from the walls. We can hear it in our sleep. We hear them calling us. Lawson's eyes widened as he scanned the entries. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Whatever had happened to the crew of the Nautilus 13, it was far worse than they had imagined. The banging on the hull, the shadows, the sense that something was inside with them. It was all part of something larger, something terrifying. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the eerie silence that had settled over the submarine seemed to grow louder. The sound of a low hum filled the air, an almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to resonate deep within their bones. The walls seemed to pulse, and for a moment, Lawson could swear that he felt something brush against his arm. He whirled around, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing there. Did anyone else feel that? He asked, his voice tight. The rest of the crew shook their heads. We should leave, one of the technicians said, his voice quivering. This place isn't right. But Lawson stood frozen. The crew of the Nautilus 13 hadn't just disappeared. They had been driven mad. The banging, the shadows, the sense that something was waiting for them. It was all connected. And now, they were about to uncover just how deep this mystery went. The oppressive atmosphere aboard the Nautilus 13 seemed to tighten around the crew with each passing minute. The walls of the submarine, which had once seemed like a solid barrier against the chaos of the ocean, now felt like a trap. A tomb that held secrets too terrifying to uncover. The low hum from deep within the submarine grew louder, more pronounced, vibrating through the very structure of the vessel. It was as if the ship itself was alive, breathing, pulsing with something hidden beneath its surface. Dr. Lawson's heart raced as he scanned the control room. The strange vibration made it almost impossible to focus. The screens in front of him flickered intermittently, displaying static and fractured images of what was once the well-maintained interior of the submarine. But now, everything appeared corrupted, twisted. The layout seemed wrong, the angles off, as though the Nautilus 13 was shifting, warping in subtle ways. The crew was unsettled, their nerves on edge. Every creak of the submarine's metal frame echoed loudly in the silence. One of the technicians, her face pale, clutched her flashlight tightly and took slow, tentative steps toward the door. I think we should leave, she stammered, her voice shaky. This place, there's something here. Lawson didn't want to admit it, but he felt it too. Something was wrong. He had led his team here, determined to find answers, but now that they were on board, he could sense an invisible force pressing down on them. The walls were closing in. The whispers from the past seemed to haunt every corner of the vessel, calling out in guttural tones. Stay calm, Lawson said, though his voice sounded strained. He tried to reassure his team, but even he was struggling to believe the words. We need to finish the analysis. There's something we're missing. We need more data. But as he spoke, another deep resonant hum filled the room. It wasn't coming from the engines, nor from any machinery. It was coming from inside the walls. No, from the very heart of the submarine. The technician closest to the door suddenly stopped, her body stiffening. She turned slowly to face the others, her eyes wide with terror. The flashlight in her hand flickered erratically, casting shadows that danced across the walls like sinister figures. I saw something, she whispered. What do you mean? Lawson asked, his voice a mix of concern and disbelief. There's something in the hallway. I saw it move, she said, trembling. It was humanoid. But wrong. Like a shadow, but solid. The words hit like a blow to the chest. A shadow, humanoid but wrong? The idea unsettled everyone in the room. The air grew thicker, and the low hum intensified. It was almost as though something was actively trying to communicate with them. But the message was unclear, warped by whatever force had taken hold of the ship. Lawson turned to one of the crew members, an expert in sonar technology, and nodded toward the hallway. Get a reading, he commanded, his voice sharp. The sonar operator, shaking with nerves, quickly set up the equipment and began scanning the area. The monitor flickered to life, revealing a dark, empty corridor. But then, something appeared on the screen. A blip, moving in the shadows. It was difficult to discern the shape, but it was there, moving toward them. There's something down there, the operator said, his voice tight with fear. It's heading this way. The crew froze. They had seen the shadow, heard the unsettling hum. Now they were not alone. Something, or someone, was watching them. Lawson's mind raced. The crew of the Nautilus 13 had been driven mad, but they hadn't just disappeared. They had been corrupted. Whatever force had invaded this submarine was powerful, unnatural, and it was still here, lingering in the walls, in the very air they were breathing. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the corridor. The sound of metal slamming against metal. The ship seemed to shake in response, as if the submarine itself was responding to the force outside. Everyone jumped, their hearts pounding. "It's coming!" One of the technicians shouted. Panic crept into his voice. "We need to get out of here now." But Lawson stood frozen, staring at the screen. The sonar blip was getting closer, closer with every passing second. There was no time to escape. He motioned for the team to prepare themselves. "We need to move now. We're not leaving until we understand what happened here." The team reluctantly followed him as he advanced down the corridor, the low hum and distant banging growing louder with every step. The shadow on the sonar screen continued to move toward them, its shape still indistinct but undeniably present. As they neared the hallway's intersection, the temperature seemed to drop suddenly. A coldness swept over them, a bone-chilling cold that didn't belong in the depths of the ocean. The shadows around them seemed to shift and stretch, pulling the light from their flashlights into an abyss. Without warning, the power on the submarine flickered out entirely. The lights died. The hum ceased. Everything fell into complete and utter darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, shallow, nervous. Then, the floor beneath them vibrated again, this time with greater force. It was as though the Nautilus 13 was alive, waking from a long, restless slumber. And then, they heard it. A voice. Faint at first, but growing stronger. "You shouldn't have come." The darkness engulfed them like a living entity, pressing down with suffocating weight. Their flashlights cut through the thick blackness, illuminating only the closest surroundings. But the shadows, relentless and shifting, seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways. Each step forward echoed in the silence, the sounds reverberating against the metal walls like the murmur of an ancient, forgotten presence. Dr. Lawson gripped his flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. He felt it, the unsettling hum still vibrating through the ship, though faint. It wasn't coming from the machinery anymore. It was something deeper, something older. Whatever haunted the Nautilus 13 was no longer hiding. It had emerged, and it was coming for them. The voice from the darkness still echoed in their minds. "You shouldn't have come." Its tone was cold, otherworldly, yet filled with an unmistakable sense of sorrow. Was it a warning? A curse? Or something worse? "Stay focused," Lawson whispered, more to himself than to the crew. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything happening around them. There was something they were missing, some clue that had eluded them until now. He had to find it before it was too late. They continued down the narrow corridor, the walls of the Nautilus 13 now seeming more like a labyrinth than the rigid, structured interior of a submarine. The halls twisted in strange angles, their layout no longer matching the blueprints they had studied. Everything was wrong. Every corner they turned felt like it led deeper into a place no human should enter. As they moved further, the air grew colder. Condensation formed on the metal surfaces, dripping like blood from unseen wounds. They passed through sections of the ship that had once been clearly defined: cafeteria, storage, engine room. But now, everything was in disarray. The floor was littered with old, rusted tools, broken equipment, and what appeared to be pieces of the missing crew's personal belongings. One of the technicians bent down, picking up a torn photograph from the floor. It was stained, the edges frayed, but the image was clear. A group of smiling faces, standing together on the deck of the Nautilus 13, taken before the mission had gone dark. At the center of the photograph was a familiar face, a face that had haunted Lawson's nightmares since they arrived. The ship's captain, Captain Warren. The technician's hand trembled as she turned the photo over. Written on the back in messy handwriting were the words, "If you find this, don't trust the walls. The darkness will claim you." A chill ran down Lawson's spine as the words settled into his mind. Was this message left by the crew? Or was it something else? Something the captain had written, Perhaps in his final moments? But why would they leave a message for someone to find? The technician's voice broke through his thoughts. We need to keep moving. It's not safe here. I can feel it. Something's wrong with this place. They moved on, deeper into the heart of the submarine. Each hallway seemed to lead to another, unfamiliar, disorienting, as if the submarine itself was shifting and changing to trap them. But the worst part was the silence. The Nautilus 13 had once been a state-of-the-art vessel, humming with the constant noise of machinery and engines. But now, there was no sound. The once bustling submarine was a graveyard of metal and flesh. The crew began to notice strange markings on the walls, scratches, deep gouges that seemed to have been made by human hands. Some of them were fresh, still oozing some dark, viscous substance that resembled blood. The walls, as if in response to their touch, seemed to ripple and undulate, as though they were alive, breathing with them. "This isn't natural," one of the crew members muttered, his voice trembling. Lawson's thoughts raced. It was as though the submarine had become a living entity, a sentient vessel, aware of their presence. But what had happened to the crew? Where were they? Suddenly, a shrill noise pierced the silence. A screeching metallic sound that reverberated through the halls like nails on a chalkboard. The crew stopped dead in their tracks, their hearts racing. The sound came from behind them, but when they turned, there was nothing there. The air grew thick with the stench of rot, and a feeling of nausea swept over Lawson. His vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, the hallway before them seemed to stretch unnaturally far into the darkness. It was as if the Nautilus 13 was no longer following the rules of physics. "There's something moving in the dark," whispered one of the crew members, barely audible. The sound of shifting metal could be heard in the distance. It was faint, but undeniable. Lawson turned to the sonar operator, who was already scanning the area. "Any readings?" he asked. The operator's hands flew over the controls, his face grim. "Nothing. I don't understand. There's something here, but the equipment can't pick it up." Without warning, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't just go out, they shattered. The crew was plunged into pitch-black darkness, and the sense of something malevolent watching them intensified. They had crossed into a part of the Nautilus 13, where even the ship systems could not offer them protection. It was no longer just a haunted ship. It was an entity unto itself, one that sought to consume those who dared to uncover its secrets. From the farthest corner of the submarine, a shadow emerged, tall, distorted, and twisted by the darkness. It was humanoid in shape, but its form flickered like a broken image, never settling into anything real. The crew stepped back in unison, fear flooding their minds. This was the moment they had all feared, the point of no return. And then, a voice whispered from the shadow, "You should have never come. You are mine now." The crew froze, each person caught in the suffocating grip of fear as the shadow before them whispered its chilling message. The shape flickered, warping like a mirage, its form shifting between the dimensions, and for a moment, it almost seemed human. But there was nothing human about the presence that radiated from it. Its cold, empty energy seeped into their bones, paralyzing them with an instinctive terror. "You are mine now." The voice was no longer a whisper. It reverberated through their minds, deafening, a command that echoed inside their skulls. Dr. Lawson was the first to react, his mind racing as he tried to force his body into motion. He grabbed the technician closest to him, pulling her back toward the bulkhead. "Move! Get to the control room now." The crew scrambled, their instincts now guiding them, despite the paralyzing fear. They stumbled over debris and broken machinery, their footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. But the entity, the shadow, did not follow them. It remained still, watching them with an invisible gaze. "Do you feel that?" whispered the sonar operator, his voice trembling. "What?" Lawson asked, trying to keep his focus. They couldn't afford to panic. "Not yet. The air, it's thickening," the operator said. "Something's changing." It was true. The atmosphere in the submarine had shifted, becoming oppressive. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the very walls were squeezing in on them. Each breath became a laborious task, and the silence pressed down on them, more suffocating than ever. When they reached the control room, Lawson immediately turned to the crew member manning the communication station. "We need to get a distress signal out." The communication officer frantically adjusted the controls, but the equipment remained dead. No response. Nothing. "Damn it," Lawson muttered. "The entire ship's systems are offline. This isn't just some technical failure. It's sabotage." As if on cue, the lights flickered once again, this time plunging the room into complete darkness. But before anyone could react, the walls of the control room groaned, a deep, unnatural sound that reverberated through their feet. It was as though the ship itself was alive, breathing, waking from an ancient slumber. "What the hell is going on?" the technician shouted, her voice rising in panic. A harsh, grinding sound filled the air. It was metallic, like bones scraping against metal. The control room's bulkhead doors slammed shut behind them, trapping the crew inside. The clanging echoed as if the ship's very skeleton was moving, shifting, folding in on itself. And then, from the deepest bowels of the Nautilus 13, came a noise. A low, guttural hum. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. It was a voice, one that resonated through the ship and into their very souls. "You should never have come," the voice crooned. It was thick with malice, like it had waited centuries to speak. "Is it speaking to us?" One of the crew members gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "No," Lawson said, his voice hoarse. "It's not speaking. It's inside our heads." The lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows on the walls, distorting the figures of the crew into grotesque shapes. For a moment, Lawson thought he saw a face, a monstrous face, half melted and writhing in the shadows. But when he blinked it was gone. "Get a grip," Lawson snapped, trying to bring some order to the chaos. "We need to move. We need to get to the aft section. It's our only chance to." Before he could finish, the ship groaned once more. The vibrations shook the control room, rattling the equipment and throwing the crew off balance. The sound of grinding metal grew louder, and the walls shuddered under the pressure. It was as if the ship was trying to expel them, to force them out. The air grew colder again, and the hum from the depths grew louder. It was becoming a chant now, a repetitive rhythmic sound that reverberated in their bones, like a heartbeat, steady and inevitable. The ship's siren began to wail, its harsh sound piercing the air, but it wasn't the usual warning. This wasn't a distress signal, it was a warning, a sound from the very depths of the ship, reverberating like a cry from the abyss. The crew stared at one another, realizing they had crossed a line from which there was no return. The ship wasn't just haunted. It was alive, its very soul connected to something far older, something ancient and dangerous. And it was growing stronger, its malevolent power rippling through the submarine's hull. "We need to get to the escape pods," one of the crew members shouted, her voice filled with panic. "We can't escape," Lawson replied grimly, shaking his head. "This ship is locked down. We're not leaving this place." "Then what do we do?" someone else asked, their voice barely audible over the wailing siren. Lawson looked around the room, the faces of his crew filled with terror. His mind raced, trying to think of a plan. There had to be something they could do. Some way to stop whatever force was driving the Nautilus 13 toward its inevitable fate. "We have to confront it," Lawson said finally, his voice firm despite the fear that gnawed at him. "There's a heart to this ship. We'll find it. We'll stop it." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. The Nautilus 13 had already claimed them. And soon, they would become part of its story. Another chapter in its long, blood-soaked history. In the suffocating stillness of the control room, the crew was paralyzed by both fear and an almost instinctive resolve to survive. The warning siren wailed louder, its desperate pitch digging into their consciousness like a needle. But the darkness surrounding them seemed to hold a power far greater than any technological signal. "This is it," Lawson said, his voice low and strained, as though his words were a final plea to some unseen force. "We're not going to make it out unless we find the heart of the ship. We have to destroy it, or whatever it is that's controlling it." The crew exchanged nervous glances, each member feeling the cold terror gripping their hearts. Their minds screamed for escape, but they knew deep down that there was nowhere to run. The Nautilus 13 was no longer just a ship. It was a living entity, an ancient beast that was closing in on them with unrelenting hunger. Without another word, Lawson motioned for them to follow. They moved through the narrow hallways of the submarine, each step seeming to echo with dread, as though the ship itself was aware of their movements. The walls seemed to pulse around them, as if breathing with life. Every turn they made, every shadow they passed, seemed to carry an unseen weight, as if the entire vessel was conspiring against them. "Where are we going?" a crew member asked, her voice trembling. "There's a central hub deep within the sub," Lawson replied, his expression grim. "It's where the core systems are controlled. It's the only place that might hold answers. And it's our best shot at stopping this." The corridor was unnervingly quiet now. The wailing siren had faded, replaced by an eerie silence that hung in the air like a heavy fog. The ship's own energy seemed to drain away, leaving only the damp metallic scent of decay. As they reached the bulkhead leading deeper into the vessel, Lawson felt a surge of cold panic rush through him. His hands were clammy, his heart pounding against his chest. He could feel the ship watching them, feel the malevolent force gathering strength, as though it was feeding off their fear. He swiped his access card across the scanner, but it refused to respond. The system was still down, completely locked out. Lawson punched the access panel in frustration, but it only made a hollow sound, as if the very walls themselves were mocking him. "It's no use," a voice murmured from behind him. "Then we'll find another way in," Lawson growled, turning away from the malfunctioning control panel. "Move out." The crew hesitated for a moment before following. They pressed on, moving through the narrow, dimly lit halls toward the core. As they neared the heart of the submarine, the temperature dropped, and the air grew colder still. The metallic scent in the air intensified, and a low hum reverberated beneath their feet. There was something else now. Something unnatural. As they rounded a final corner, the first officer stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide with terror. His face went pale as he stared into the dark corridor ahead. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ahead of them, standing in the center of the corridor, was the unmistakable shape of a door. But it wasn't just any door. It was alive, pulsing with energy. The walls surrounding it contorted as though they were breathing, shifting with each heartbeat. Lawson stepped forward, his body trembling with anticipation and dread. He didn't know what to expect, but the decision had been made. They had to face whatever waited on the other side. With a trembling hand, he reached for the door's handle. Before he could make contact, a shrill scream pierced the air. One of the crew members collapsed to the floor, clutching their chest. The others rushed to help, but they were too late. The body convulsed, and in an instant, the lifeless form was dragged into the shadows by invisible hands. "Get away from the door!" Lawson shouted, panic rising in his chest. But it was too late. The entity within the ship was stirring again, more powerful than ever. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the door, now fully alive, slammed open with a deafening screech, revealing an impossibly vast chamber beyond. The crew stood frozen, their faces filled with a mix of terror and disbelief as they gazed into the heart of the submarine. The core of the Nautilus 13. The chamber was massive, filled with a pulsating, writhing mass of wires and cables, twisting like veins in a living organism. At the center, a massive, blackened structure sat, its shape constantly shifting, as if it was trying to take on the form of something they could understand, but failing. It was an ancient machine, a fusion of technology and something far older. It seemed to hum with a consciousness of its own, beckoning them forward. The very air seemed to vibrate with a low, guttural growl. The crew stepped closer, each movement slower, as though they were being drawn in by an unseen force. They could feel it, the terrible, suffocating presence of the ship's heart, and its hold on them was growing stronger. And then, from the depths of the chamber, a voice echoed, low and haunting, reverberating through the crew's minds. "Foolish mortals," it whispered, the words crawling into their minds like insects. "You are too late. The Nautilus 13 is mine. And now, so are you."